Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
And I'm Mike Polk. You're watching Ohio's only show about Ohio politics. That's not true, but really the only one that matters as far as I'm concerned.
The only one with us on it.
Yeah, it's true. And boy, we're getting close, aren't we?
We are about a month out from Election Day, which is absolutely wild.
I feel like I've aged like a president so far, just leading up to this election. How about you?
Oh, I just feel younger every day that we get to spend all this time together.
It's true. You are looking lovelier. Well, we've got to get these people up to date on what's been going on this week, because boy, it's moving really quick right now. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and we just had the vice presidential debate. This is pretty much guaranteed to be the last debate that we're going to see leading into the election. So it's all about the vice presidential debate today between Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
I still might kind of disagree with you there, though, because I know that the presidential debate might not be happening, obviously, because the former President Trump says that he doesn't want to debate anymore. That makes sense, but he's a little erratic sometimes. I don't know if you noticed that. He might change his mind. I still think he might change his mind, especially if provoked enough, that he might say, you know what, I want to get back in the ring with Kamala, or as he calls her, Kamala.
You know, what I say is, I am never surprised when I'm surprised.
Okay, well, who do we have on as our special guests on Ohio Has Issues this week?
All right, giving us some insight into how they felt the debate went and how they think it might impact Ohio voters, if it'll have any movement there. We have both Democrat and Republican representation. We've got David Brock, he's the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party chair. And we have Jordan Ohler. He's a Republican strategist with a company called Swing State Strategies, or S3. And let me just tell you, we are so focused on being balanced on this show that we booked two guests who basically look like the same person.
Different parties, same vibe.
Yeah, they are, as you can see, they are two very fair-skinned men who are lacking hair on the top of their heads, but have a little bit of hair on their faces.
Wow.
So,
way to really lay it out there for them incredibly specifically.
And just in case you're listening to this podcast, that's how you have to do it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that this goes out over terrestrial radio, right?
Yeah, it does. So,
okay, good.
So there you have it. Accidental twinning. We did not do that on purpose, but that's how committed we are to equal representation and balance on this show.
And then, of course, we always have to talk about issue 1 and the Senate race. Who are we speaking with about that?
Yes, we have State House News Bureau reporter Jo Ingles.
You know Jo Ingles. She's been on the show before. Good friend of the show now.
Yeah, she'll be talking with us about issue 1 and the ballot board, kind of related on those particular topics, and also sentiment towards one of our Senate candidates on the topic of abortion, with some numbers that have come out on the abortion report here in Ohio.
She's pulling double duty. 2 issues. We're covering a bunch of her work today because she's been doing a lot of good stuff. So look forward to speaking with her. We also want to point out in our Ohio Roundup, folks, we got some important dates coming up. Monday, October 7th is the deadline to register to vote. Tuesday, October 8th is early in-person voting. That's when voting by mail starts. Boy, that's just a couple days away.
Yep, you can vote early in person starting that day, or you can start doing voting by mail that day.
Monday, November 4th, if you're mailing your ballot in, it's got to be postmarked by that day, November 4th. And then, of course, Tuesday, November 5th, as we all famously know, is Election Day.
It is. It will be here before we know it. So let's get to talking about more of the issues that you need to know about leading up to Election Day. Jo Ingles, who is with the State House News Bureau, she reported on some numbers that came out in the Ohio Abortion Report, kind of giving us an idea of the landscape here in Ohio over the past several years, what's happening, the circumstances under which abortions are happening and people are seeking this health care. And then also talks about some fallout that Bernie Moreno has experienced based on some comments that he made about abortion not too long ago.
I found some of these numbers very interesting. Take a look. Jo, thanks for joining us. Are you ready to chat some Ohio politics?
Sure.
All right. Thank you for your latest work. We're going to talk about a couple of them. You've been talking about abortion in Ohio as of late, which is a hot topic, obviously, and getting more and more important as we near this election day. This last article you wrote was called "Abortion Numbers Went Up in Ohio, Including Out-of-State Patients." So we now have some numbers. First of all, why don't you tell us where these numbers came from and what they seem to indicate?
Well, this is the Ohio Abortion Report, and every year in Ohio, the Ohio Department of Health puts out statistics on abortions, how many of them there are, the conditions they're being performed under, who's getting abortions, where they live, that kind of thing. And we saw that those numbers went up, an increase of 3,512 abortions from 2022 to 2023. And we also saw that there was an increase in the number of a 7%, if from 7 to 12.6%, there was an increase in the number of abortions done on patients from out of state. So we also know that those numbers are kind of deceiving, because you can't say that all of them were that situation, because we had in 2022 there was a ban in place for about 3 months, and that ban was making sure that you couldn't get an abortion in Ohio more than 6 weeks into a pregnancy. So with those two things going on, it's hard to tell why that increase is there. But
right. So it's hard to say whether or not, it's hard to completely say that these numbers are comparable when really for 1/4 of the year that one of the years took place, just no one could get an abortion legally compared to.
You could, but you had to be early in a pregnancy.
Oh,
6 weeks into a pregnancy, a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant by that time. So, when you look at the abortion numbers, they really went down during those months in 2022.
Now, those out of state numbers, that's obviously higher than it had been in the past. Is that attributed to tighter abortion laws at other states that surround Ohio?
Yeah, other states that surround Ohio have abortion laws in effect, and so people came in from those states, traveled in from those states to get abortions here, and so they're thinking that's what was a contributing factor to it.
Now, you spoke with somebody from the Anti-Abortion Right to Life organization, and how are they reacting to these numbers?
Well, Ohio Right to Life President Mike Ganadakis, he would like to see abortion go away. And he says that, he thinks it's mostly these out-of-state abortions coming in that are raising the numbers. Kelly Copeland, who is with Abortion Forward, is saying, well, I don't know about that. I think maybe these out-of-state, numbers are not all we're seeing. It's also this fact that you couldn't get abortions in many circumstances in 2022. So that's also adding into it. But there's really no way to know exactly how the numbers went up or why.
They do break down the numbers a little bit more and get into the demographics a bit. What are those demographics telling us?
And the demographics show that of those people getting abortions, almost half were Black women. Now, if you think about the overall population and Black women, how much of the population they represent, they are not half of the population.
Right.
So it is disproportional, the number of Black women who are getting abortions, but that has been the case for a very long time. In fact, I can't remember a time when it wasn't the case. Again, we don't know exactly why that's the case, but a lot of people have thought that maybe there are factors at work, economic factors that are considerations. And it also shows that a lot of women who are getting abortions already have children or they're older. So, that might come into play as well.
I was surprised by some of the numbers as far as when the abortions are actually being performed, because it goes into that as well, as far as at what point in the pregnancy. Could you give us a couple of those numbers?
Sure. 87.6% of abortions were performed on women whose pregnancies were at 12 weeks or less. That's the vast majority. 63.3 were under 9 weeks, and but only 146 abortions, or 6.6%, were performed after 21 weeks. Now, we hear a lot about so-called late term. That's not a medical term, but we hear late term abortions. But if you look at late term abortions, only 146 were performed after that point, and those tend to be usually abortions where there are miscarriages or something going on.
Life of the mother.
Life of the mother, something's happening in a pregnancy. Because people typically don't wait that late, and you see the numbers that they don't wait that late. So
And this was one more disturbing stat was that Ohio abortion includes 71 girls under 15 years old. Now, of
Yeah,
course, that's
that's
that's scary to hear,
yeah.
and it's an unpleasant thing to think about. But one could argue that it's better than somebody who is 15 years old not being able to address their own health needs.
Well, it raises so many questions for me because I want to know those 71 girls. I want to know what their circumstances are. Is that rape? Is that something that is criminal like that? We know that during the ban, there was a 10-year-old girl who was unable to get an abortion and had to go to Indiana to get one, and she was a rape victim. So I wonder, of that 71 who are so young, how many of them are a victim of crime? Or is it a condition where, parents haven't talked to kids about birth control and they don't know? You just don't know. That's the
Right.
big thing about this abortion report. It gives you a lot of numbers, but it really doesn't answer the whys. You still have the whys there.
Well, you can tell that it is obviously a very dominant issue for
Mhm.
Ohioans, Ohio women in particular, and people during this election because people are reacting strongly. And another column that you wrote recently called Republicans Independents Say They Won't Vote for Moreno after comments on women and abortion. You talk about a group of Ohio Republicans Independents who say they won't be voting for Bernie Moreno based on how he has spoken about that. Why don't you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, Bernie Moreno was speaking to a crowd of supporters in the Cincinnati, Southwest Ohio area, and he made a comment. I'll just quote it here, okay? Quote, the left has a lot of single issue voters. Sadly, by the way, there's a lot of suburban women, that are like, listen, abortion is it. If I can't have an abortion in this country whenever I want, I will vote for anyone else. A little crazy, by the way, but especially for women who are like past 50, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that's an issue for you, unquote. And then he kind of joked that, it was a good thing his wife didn't hear it. But people in the crowd, including some women, were laughing. And that resonated with a lot of people who said, this shows that Bernie Moreno just doesn't get it when it comes to abortion.
Mm-hmm. And so they've, in a sense, formed their own coalition, right?
Yeah. Well, and there after in the days after, we heard a lot of people saying, "Hey, we have a problem with those comments because just because we're not a woman of childbearing years doesn't mean that we don't have interest in abortion or what happens to our kids or grandkids, that sort of thing." Some of these women, by the way, are older and they fought to get the right to abortion to begin with.
Mm.
So, the age thing was a complaint, but then there was the whole idea that he wants to go in and like Tammy Krings was this independent voter that they brought in from Pataskala near Columbus here. And she said Moreno is not accepting the will of the 57% of Ohioans who voted for abortion last fall.
And that seems to be the case, that there does seem to be some cross-party involvement here. I mean, this isn't just Democrats speaking. You talk to Republicans and independents. Have you seen a lot of that in your coverage of this campaign?
We have seen Republicans who are coming out and saying that they cannot vote for Donald Trump, that they cannot vote for Bernie Moreno because they think that the party is too far to the right on those issues. They don't like what they're seeing in terms of abortion and other issues, actually. But last week, a couple of Republicans came to near the State House, and they said, one Republican guy from the Columbus area said, you don't have to be a woman over 50 to feel strongly about abortion, or under 50 to feel strongly about reproductive rights. He said,
Right.
I'm a man. He goes, I don't feel like I don't feel like I should be telling women what to do with their body. And it's disrespectful to me, he says, that someone else wants to tell women in my life what to do with their body.
I could understand that. And I understand the frustration with The very idea, I feel like, that we shouldn't care about something unless it directly involves us as an individual is, I think, what people are probably pushing back at too. But it's not
And yeah,
with
it's a
abortions and
theme.
so many other things. I'm
Yeah.
currently not I'm not Israeli or Palestinian, and I am not over there. But that doesn't mean that I can't have feelings or think about it or care about it. And I think that's probably, I'm assuming, what people are responding to.
Yeah, and we've heard this cry from the Democrats all along in this campaign because they feel like, just because you're not in a certain group of people who is at that point being a target of some sort of alleged discrimination or some sort of negative outcome, that just because you're not in that group doesn't mean you shouldn't stand up for that group, doesn't mean you shouldn't think about that group. And, we've seen a lot of that in the campaign. There's been a lot of fear mongering in recent weeks. I've talked to people who, I had a sheriff tell me that he has seen a couple of his constituents in his community come in and actually sit in his office and cry because they feel afraid, because they're hearing about all these people coming into their community who are new and maybe committing crimes. And we know that, a lot of that probably comes from things that they're seeing, reading, political events, whatever. And, it's a very difficult situation because a lot of people don't really know the exact situation that they're facing. So, and they hear all these things happening outside and they don't know if they're true or not. And that's been the big thing about this campaign. If you are fearful because of what you don't know, you can really that can really work for or against a candidate depending on how they're spinning that fear. And I think that's what we're seeing coming out of this now.
Well, Joe, it's a huge issue going into the election. Thank you for your coverage of it. I know it's a sensitive one to cover. Thanks for covering it for Ohio, and we appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and I appreciate you as well.
Thanks for that, Joe. We're going to catch up with her a little bit later in the show.
All right. Joe did quote Bernie Moreno when she was speaking there. She read it verbatim, but you might as well hear it for yourself. Here is Bernie Moreno talking at a town hall in September.
Look, there's a lot of single issue. The left has a lot of single issue voters. Sadly, by the way, there's a lot of suburban women. A lot of suburban women that are like, listen, abortion's it. If I can't have an abortion in this country whenever I want, I will vote for anybody else. Okay, a little crazy, by the way, but especially for women that are like past 50, I'm thinking to myself, that's an issue for you.
So there you have it, verbatim from the candidate himself. And of course, we reached out to the Moreno campaign for their response. This is the statement Reagan McCarthy gave us. Quote, Bernie was clearly making a tongue-in-cheek joke about how Sherrod Brown and members of the left-wing media like to pretend that the only issue that matters to women voters is abortion. Bernie's view is that women voters care just as much about the economy, rising prices, crime, and our open southern border as male voters do, and it's disgusting that Democrats and their friends in the left-wing media constantly treat all women as if they're automatically single-issue voters on abortion who don't have other concerns that they vote on.
So we're going to get to those statements in just a moment that were made about the Brown campaign, but I did ask these follow-ups of the Moreno campaign, and I wanted to be clear, I didn't get answers to these questions. I asked if they could point me to the basis on which Mr. Moreno was saying that Senator Brown views abortion as the only thing that matters to women. Also, if they could explain how it was a joke that Mr. Moreno was making about what he believes Brown's views to be, given the fact that he doesn't mention Senator Brown at all in the statement. I asked if there was more to the quote, and if so, could they please share it with me? And I also asked if they could clarify why Mr. Moreno thinks abortion is not important to women over the age of 50, but I did not get a response to any of those questions. And since Moreno's campaign did very specifically mention Senator Sherrod Brown, here's what Brown had to say about Moreno's comments.
The idea that he doesn't understand why women care so much about this. And in some sense, he was mocking them, I think. It says a lot more about him, frankly, about him and his values. I continue to be shocked that Bernie Moreno thinks he knows more, that he knows better than 57% of Ohioans turned out to vote and said that we want constitutional right to abortion in our state.
So now you've heard from both candidates on the topic, and you decide what you think there. Hey, here's something you're going to get to vote on, issue 1. You remember this thing, don't you? It's the proposed redistricting amendment that will be on Ohio ballots in November. It's being championed by 2 former Ohio Supreme Court justices. Who are they again?
The former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, a Republican.
And Democrat Yvette McGee Brown. To help you prepare to cast your vote on issue 1, here's a piece that Stephanie put together that explains what it means to vote for it and what it means to vote against it, legally speaking.
When you cast your ballot in this year's election, you'll have a choice to make about the proposed redistricting amendment labeled as issue 1. Legally speaking, a vote for issue 1 is a vote to change how our voting districts are drawn in the state of Ohio. A vote against issue 1 is a vote to maintain the status quo. Right now, our voting districts for Ohio's House and Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives are drawn by elected politicians. The people supporting issue 1 want to change that. They say our elected leaders shouldn't be in charge of choosing how the people they represent are grouped together because it's led to politicians creating voting districts that help keep them in power. People who oppose issue 1 say that it's not a good solution to this problem because it would require voting districts to, quote, closely correspond to statewide party preferences, which is something that our current voting districts, as drawn by our elected leaders, do not do. If it passes, issue 1 will change Ohio's constitution to require voting districts to be created by citizens, not politicians. Any qualified Ohio voter would be able to apply to be part of this group. A bipartisan panel of retired judges would then narrow down the applicants to 45 people, equally split among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And the final group of 15 people that would make up the Citizens Redistricting Commission would be chosen from there, again, equally split among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Political party officials, current or former politicians, lobbyists, and their immediate family members would not be eligible to be on the commission. If issue 1 passes and citizens go on to draw new district maps, any Ohio voter will be able to challenge any of those maps by filing a case with the Ohio Supreme Court. The first maps would have to be in place by September 2025 so they could be used in next year's election. The next new maps would be drawn in 2031 following the release of the latest census data and every 10 years after that. So hopefully that clears things up a little bit for you on issue 1. I know it's very confusing, especially because there's controversy over the ballot language and the summary that will appear on your ballots, and just trying to make it as clear as possible for people what it means to vote for and what it means to vote against it.
It almost seems like it's, in some ways, intentionally confusing, but who knows?
That is an argument that was put before the Ohio Supreme Court, and the Ohio Supreme Court did decide that most of the language from the Ohio ballot board could be used. It was language that talks about gerrymandering in an amendment that is meant to end gerrymandering, but the language, as you read it, will say that it actually requires gerrymandering. So very controversial. The people that support issue 1 are not happy with this ballot language. Some of them are now trying to take action to change how the Ohio ballot board operates to try and stop this kind of controversy from happening in the future.
That's right, and I got to speak with Joe Ingles, friend of the show, about that earlier. Okay, Joe, we got to talk about this one. You wrote an article called "After 3 Lawsuits Against GOP-Led Ohio Ballot Board, Democrats Introduce a Bill to Change It." Why in heaven's name would anybody want to change the ballot board or how this smooth running machine that is the entire Ohio political operation? Why would they want to change things, Joe?
You're so funny, Mike. Oh, it's been really down here. It's been a fight over this ballot board because the ballot board is supposed to be a nonpartisan board that's supposed to do several things. But one thing that they really do is they create the summary for things that go on the ballot. And within the last 2 years, there have been 3 statewide issues. And in all 3, there have been questions about the summary language that has been chosen by the Republican-dominated ballot board for amendments that are on the ballot. And the Democrats in the legislature say that that language has been extremely partisan, that it hasn't been a summary of the amendment proposed, and instead has been a politically charged statement that is, when someone goes to the ballot and they see the ballot language in front of them, it may be very different than what the actual amendment says that they're voting on. And so some Democratic state lawmakers are upset with it, and they're bringing forward a bill to try to reorganize the ballot board in a way that's less partisan.
Yeah. As you say, I do think it's the consistency of this over time that finally has probably led to at least the attempt to change this ballot board, because as you said, the thing that it's supposed to do is clarify and simplify things for Ohio voters through the language. But it's essentially, according to Democrats and people who look at things with their eyes, it has been weaponized in a way to try and at least spin it in a favorable way to that the vote that will influence the voter to vote in lines with how the ballot board / Republicans wish for them to vote. Correct?
Right, right.
And latest example of this is the redistricting one.
Right. The redistricting ballot amendment, if you read the amendment, it is very different than what you will see on the ballot. On the ballot, it says that this process that they want to change to requires gerrymandering. But the amendment that's being brought forward is being brought forward to get rid of gerrymandering. The amendment that the backers of it have said they can't trust politicians anymore because politicians come in and they change the rules. They don't follow the rules that were set in place. We saw 7 court actions that said that the current maps were unconstitutional. We're working on unconstitutional maps right now, basically. And so there's a big question about the effectiveness of the current redistricting method, because what voters voted for in 2015 and 2018, the backers of the current redistricting amendment change say that those rules are not being followed. So what they want to do is just cut politicians out of it altogether and establish citizen-led panels that would do the redistricting.
Okay, and you list a few of the things that the bill would do in here. What are the things that the bill would actually technically do?
Well, the bill would basically ban politicians and lobbyists from serving on the ballot board. And it would put more bipartisanship in the appointment process, and it would establish bipartisan co-chairs, and it would require the entire board to adopt the titles for ballot issues so that you don't, the objective would be to not have a ballot summary that says something that is diametrically opposed to what the actual amendment is.
That seems like good common sense right there. Now, this has not probably a strong likelihood of passing. Is that correct?
Well, it's being brought forward by Democrats, first of all. And so we have a very Republican legislature. So I'm going to say that's huge right there. But secondly, if you look at the timing of when it's being brought forward, it's the legislature is not here right now. They're home in their districts campaigning. They will not be here until after the election. And when they come back, there is a whole list of things that they want to accomplish before the end of this year, because if they don't, next year will be a newly seated legislature, and they might not take up some of these things that lawmakers have been pushing for the past couple of years. So they're not likely to take this up anytime soon, if ever. But, the sponsor of it is saying that, hey, if they don't take it up right now, we'll bring it up next General Assembly.
And so even if it is a bit more of a messaging bill, it might live on, and this could exist and actually come to fruition at some point down the line, maybe?
At some point down the line, a lot is riding on this November. How Ohioans vote down the ticket is going to really affect what happens at the State House in issues like this, and it's going to affect what happens in the U.S. Senate, what happens in the Ohio Supreme Court. These things matter. This election matters, and it's not just if you vote for Trump or Harris. It's all the way down the ballot. There are a lot of ramifications for things, and one of them could be the balance in the Ohio legislature. And if Democrats get more of a balance in the Ohio legislature, bills like this would have more of a chance of passing.
All right, Joe, thank you very much for filling us in on that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye now.
Thank you again to Joe from the State House News Bureau, again doing incredible work here in the state of Ohio. I want to mention particularly part of that bill that she talked about in her reporting. It would require the entire ballot board to adopt titles for ballot issues. That is very on point to the controversy that was surrounding issue 1, the redistricting amendment, because the language related to that passed along party lines, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. So if there were a situation where the entire ballot board had to approve the title language, it would certainly be different in this case. It would not have the suggestion that this amendment actually does what it is trying to stop doing, for sure.
It would probably, at least, it would require more compromise, I
would.
suppose.
It would.
Yeah, so,
All right.
good luck with that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to your Senate update now. You may remember that there are 3 senatorial candidates in this race.
And we're so sick of everyone forgetting about the 3rd candidate. Of course, you have Sherrod Brown, who's been around a while, very Moreno, very colorful character from the other major party. But then everybody forgets about the Kiss Man, Don Kissick.
The Kiss Man, Don Kissick. He's the Libertarian candidate. He's been a little bit tight-lipped, so
Hard getting any kind of real policy answers out of him. He's not a real wonk. He's more of just a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy.
just more of a, I'm here. Here's my presence, not necessarily
Don thing.
shouting from the rooftops or anything like that. But he does have a website that we've been perusing. Unfortunately, it seems to be most recently updated in 2018. So from the best that we can
And
tell,
it looks like it was made in 1994.
well, we'll talk to his design team about that. Mike Polk Jr., website
Just saying.
design
Don,
extraordinaire.
step it up, buddy.
Okay, so on his website, we see a little bit of his platform. We talked a little bit last week from the top of his platform. Now we're going to talk about what he thinks about the economy, at least as of 2018.
All right, I'll try to do my best kissing. Quote, we tax too much, and more importantly, we spend too much. This is an unsustainable path. Government's gluttony for taxing and spending hampers economic growth in America at every turn by creating market distortions and sapping the middle class of its purchasing power and ability to build savings. That impact upon the middle class is an unconscionable consequence of government cause resultant inflation. This has to be reversed sooner rather than later. Honestly, some decent points in there from the Kiss Man.
I mean, I like the idea of more money. More money in my pocket sounds
Yeah.
good. Unfortunately, this is from 2018, so we do not know.
Might
if
be
he
totally different now.
Still feels this way.
Yep.
He may love tax now. I don't know.
People change their tone sometimes, especially around election season.
People can change.
Maybe he's moved towards the middle.
They can. All right, let's move on to a conversation about a different debate that I guess may not be happening, probably won't be happening.
This is a real weird situation because, we'll get into it obviously, but both candidates have said that they want this to happen, but for some reason it's just not happening, which tells me that maybe both can't. Well, you get into it. Go
Maybe
ahead and
his
show it.
people aren't talking to his people. Anyway, Jeremy Pelzer did some reporting on this. He's a great friend of the show, reports for Cleveland.com, and this is a nationally watched, super competitive U.S. Senate race. Based on what we're seeing around the country, it is more than likely that the winner of the U.S. Senate race here in Ohio is going to determine the balance of power in the Senate.
That's true, because it's too early to say, but it looks like John Tester ain't looking real good in Montana. So that puts it all, the weight of the whole balance of the Senate on, if that goes that way, right here in Ohio.
Yeah. So far right now, neither campaign has reached out to the other campaign to try and figure out a date, even though, as you said, Mike, both of the candidates had said they would be willing to debate. So the spokesperson for Sherrod Brown's campaign, Matt Keyes, he declined to comment on this to Cleveland.com, but Reagan McCarthy is the one who had told Pelzer that nobody had reached out about any dates about holding a debate. Now, if this happens, this will be the first time in recent history that there hasn't been a general election debate for U.S. Senate in Ohio, which will be very interesting.
That's crazy.
But they are making their voices heard.
Yeah, and they're doing that. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but there have been a couple of ads talking about the candidates. Perhaps you've even seen some on some stations around town.
And it's breaking spending records.
It is. More than $266 million worth of TV airtime has been reserved in Ohio for U.S. Senate ads. $266 million. That's just for the Senate, according to Medium Buying, a Columbus-based political ad tracker. That figure doesn't include radio spots, mailers, online advertising, or people just running up and yelling at you in the street.
Yeah, I wonder what the going rate is for that.
It costs money. Town criers.
Town criers for TV. Well, speaking of town criers, that's kind of like a throwback
It is.
to historical times. And happy birthday, by the way. Happy belated birthday to former President Jimmy Carter. Turned 100 yesterday.
Congrats, man. It's amazing. And he's trying to hang in there to vote. I guess we shouldn't say it like that. I hope he hangs in there to like water ski next summer. But realistically, he's trying to hang in there to vote.
Well, I hope he makes it to 125.
Yes, why not?
Long life in these years. But we did see a post, or I did see a post on social media from Jacob Rubashkin. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. He's the deputy editor of Inside Elections, and that's a news organization that provides nonpartisan analysis and research. It's based out of Washington, D.C. And he posted this 1980 campaign ad. And Jacob called the campaign ad quiet, dignified, totally unlike anything on the airwaves in modern times. So we thought you should see it.
Each day, many people come to the Oval Office with advice and information. But when it comes time to decide something, President Carter must decide alone. No matter how many advisors and assistants, a president can never escape the responsibility of truly understanding an issue himself. That is the only way that a presidential decision can be made, and the only way that this president has ever made one. President Carter.
Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like after watching that ad, even though we've got this busy newsroom behind us, it just feels like we should be in a moment of quiet because it was so quiet. It was so peaceful.
Yeah, it was kind of foreign to this world these days. Feels like a different world, a different time. And I, for one, would like to live there.
And it's even really interesting that this was posted on social media because social media itself has just become such a loud place. It was kind of jarring, actually, to see it. So
There was probably like a really busy animated ad for an energy drink bouncing right next to it. That makes me sick. But
yeah. But in any case, happy birthday to the former president.
happy birthday, Mr. President. Now, we did have ourselves a debate, as you know, last night, and there were some moments there that we need to speak about. If you may recall, a bit of fact-checking happened during the debate. It was about Springfield, Ohio. Sad still, but still, always nice to be recognized. JD mentioned that when he got fact-checked, he specifically said that was not part of the rules and complained about that. But the moderators would not let him reference immigrants who came to the U.S. illegally in the context of Springfield, Ohio. And here's what Haitian migrant, because the Haitian migrants are here legally, right?
Right.
Okay. So our National Verify team did their own fact check of both Vance and Walz, focusing on climate change and how clean the U.S. economy is, how much our energy supply comes from the U.S., rising costs of food and housing prices, and what Project 2025 says about tracking pregnancy, abortion, miscarriage, and stillbirths. So for that fact check, here's Casey Decker.
The two vice presidential candidates squared off on the debate stage with just over a month to go until the November 5th election. We here at Verify, we're tracking the claims made by Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Walz to fact check which claims were true and which were false. Here are our sources. Early on, the moderators asked about climate change, pointing to the devastating hurricane that just hit the southeast. J.D. Vance focused his answer on the importance of producing energy in the United States.
You'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world.
That claim is false. The U.S. does not have the cleanest economy in the world. Several agencies have measured this by calculating the amount of carbon emissions each country generates and comparing it to their economic production. By those metrics, the U.S. is cleaner than some other large economies, such as China and Canada, but dirtier than some others, like much of Western Europe. Tim Walz responded by saying Democrats have managed to pass policies addressing climate change, while also overseeing an increase in energy supply.
We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have.
That is true. Data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows crude oil production is at an all-time high, increasing every year since 2021 after a brief drop-off due to the pandemic. The data also shows that natural gas production in America has never been higher, rising every year since 2016. Turning to the economy, Vance made this claim about rising prices during the time Kamala Harris has been vice president.
She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%.
These claims need context. From January 2021, when Biden and Harris took office, to August 2024, food prices rose roughly 22%, according to the government's Consumer Price Index. It's pretty close to what Vance claimed. But the 60% increase in housing prices appears to be an exaggeration. The CPI rent index went up about 23%, and the median sale price of a house rose 16%. Mortgage rates are 119% higher than when Biden took office, and a federal housing price index shows a 41% increase. Finally, Tim Walz made this claim when discussing the subject of abortion.
Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies.
This claim is false. Project 2025 wouldn't require parents to actively register pregnancies. Instead, it would require states to submit data about abortions, miscarriages, and stillbirths after they happen. Currently, some states voluntarily report some of this data to the CDC. And while Vance has connections to the authors of Project 2025, the campaign has repeatedly distanced itself from it. We have many more fact checks from this debate available at verifythis.com. With your Verified, I'm Casey Decker.
Thank you, Casey. And as he said, please go to verifythis.com for more fact checks.
All right, now let's get to analysis from both sides of the aisle on the vice presidential debate and the performance of Senator for Ohio J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who both very much want to be our next vice presidents.
Yeah, who cares what we think? We want to find out how these guys think their team did.
Yeah, so from the Republican side, we have Jordan Ohler. He is of Swing State Strategies, or S3. He's the vice president there. And Jordan has experience with national consulting, advising clients on public relations, crisis communications, state and national politics. He's been on the show before, so let's welcome him back again now. Jordan, thank you for being back with us here on Ohio Has Issues. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me back.
All right, we are closing in on Election Day. It's coming up. It's going to be here before we know it. Now we have the only vice presidential debate behind us. I want to ask you from the Republican perspective, what do you think J.D. Vance's goal was going into the debate last night?
Well, I thought the debate was a clear lopsided victory for Senator Vance. He clearly came in wanting to win the debate and make a clear concise choice for voters that night. And in my political career, I've never seen a more clear, interesting contrast between two candidates on stage. You know, Walz put on a debate performance that was kind of worthy of Joe Biden. His body language, especially between these two men, was very, very different on stage. J.D. Vance projected strength. Tim Walz projected weakness. J.D. Vance looked like he had command of the issues. Walz looked like he was on his back foot, defending constantly Kamala Harris's poor performance as a VP under Joe Biden, and continuing doubling down on that career. He was on his back foot debating both J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris's performance so far, and he just did not look good doing it. He made excuses for his failures in China, did not answer those questions very appropriately, even referred to himself as a knucklehead. So it was not a great debate, and I think even the internet saw that it was a very lopsided performance. J.D. Vance looked great, looked like a great number two to Donald Trump.
Now, you as a Republican strategist may be uniquely positioned to answer this question, because this is something that I've found interesting. In the conversations about this, there's been a lot of conversation on the Republican side about the things that Kamala Harris has not done as vice president. Now we see two men who are running for that very position. Do you think, should J.D. Vance win, does he expect to be able to execute things that Kamala Harris hasn't been able to execute in the role as vice president?
Well, I think the big question is, why haven't she done what she says she's going to be doing? It has to be answered. That is the fundamental question of this election, is Americans in their waking hours, their adult years, saw a better America. They voted for a better America under Donald Trump, and they didn't get it on the last 4 years under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. It has been a disaster. Anything she could have done, anything she's saying right now to the American people, she could be doing right now. And that question has yet to be answered by either Kamala Harris or Tim Walz.
I guess that's my question. Is that true? How much power does the vice president have is really what that question comes down to.
Well, when you remove Joe Biden as the president, essentially make him, a senior citizen on vacation while he's a sitting vice president, you would expect Kamala Harris to step up and show a little leadership if she's going to be the next president.
All right, I want to ask you about the many things that Senator Vance and Governor Walz said that they agreed on. Quick rundown of this, okay? Politico put out an article about it. Here are the 6 things from my notes that they agreed on. Congressional funding for immigration policy, U.S. manufacturing and energy production coming home, becoming more prominent, being more of a focus of that happening here in the United States, support of fertility treatments, doing better on guns in terms of making our schools safe, making our children safe, not blaming immigrants for the housing crisis and the fact that we should not be using houses as commodities. Now, I know that is a wide range of topics, but I want to ask you, were you surprised as a Republican strategist to see them admitting and agreeing to so many things on the debate stage?
No, I wasn't at all. In fact, I thought it was emblematic of J.D. Vance's strong performance that he could both agree with Tim Walz and yet prosecute the administration for a very poor performance. JD was just very much in command of the entire debate, even over the moderators themselves who were not getting the rules right, not allowing him to speak. But he handled Tim Walz, looked like the adult in charge, had clear and concise answers to America's biggest problems, which is the economic factor, prices, groceries, the pain that it's causing Americans, and illegal immigration, which is a massive, massive issue.
I want to ask you about that moment there when you mentioned the moderators not getting the rules right. It was said going into the debate last night that the moderators would not be focusing on fact checking. They would be allowing the candidates to do that for themselves. There was one moment, though, when a fact check was implemented by the moderators. And JD Vance at that point said, I think the quote is, the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check. Now, this was after JD Vance referenced Springfield, Ohio, which we know has been in the national conversation because some of past comments that were made, some of those past comments made being actually fact checked by a variety of outlets. We don't need to necessarily get into that now. But the thing that was referenced yesterday was a comment of him saying millions of illegal immigrants in the conversation about Springfield, Ohio. That's when the moderators pointed out that the Haitians that are in Springfield, Ohio are actually there legally under temporary protected status. I don't want to argue about what temporary protected status means right now. I just want to ask you, as a Republican strategist, do you think that moment is going to move Ohio voters in any particular way?
I think Ohio voters are very concerned about what's happening in Springfield. And you can set aside, the cat question and the circus around that. What's very, very true is that 20,000 illegal immigrants were sent to Springfield, Ohio with no infrastructure, no support, no backup to handle that influx on the town. And we're seeing, really, really bad economic output from that, higher rental prices to find housing. And no, it should not be blamed on illegal immigrants. But as JD Vance pointed out correctly, the Federal Reserve noted that an influx of illegal immigrants would push housing prices higher. So that has to be said. It is a fact. It's very true. And real people are feeling it here in Ohio.
I do want to ask you just to clarify, because sometimes I can't hear perfectly over Zoom. Did you say 20,000 illegal immigrants were sent to Springfield?
I did say that, yes.
Okay, I just want to point out here that having temporary protected status is legal, and that's what those immigrants have. And whether or not you agree with that it should be legal, they do have legal status right now. So I do want to make that clear for everybody listening. And I want to move now the conversation to the conversation about abortion that happened last night. The timing of this, I thought, was particularly interesting. JD Vance did say that he is, again, not going to get into what he previously said, but yesterday he said he's not for a national abortion ban. And then after the debate, or right near the end of the debate, former President Donald Trump posted on social media that he would ban a national abortion ban if it came to his desk, if he were to be elected president again. Do you think that moves anything for Ohio voters?
I think Ohio voters already made their stand last year and called to question what they want to see happen in Ohio. Donald Trump is consistent about leaving this to the states to decide. The states are deciding. JD Vance has effectively put this issue to bed. And, we still fight for the right to life in every day and everything that we do, families, protecting children, everything about this election comes down to that. But this issue is not really about abortion anymore. This is about the protection of families and the overall holistic health of them.
Okay. There was a moment towards the end of the debate, just a couple more questions for you, Jordan. I appreciate you getting into this with me. At the end of the debate, Governor Walz called a moment a particularly, quote, damning non-answer. This was when J.D. Vance was asked about the 2020 election, and he did not answer that the former president lost the 2020 election. Do you think that's going to have an impact for Ohio voters when they go to cast their ballot in November?
I don't think anything about the Trump administration is ever going to be registering in people's minds as they go to the ballot box after the last 4 years of absolute pain they've been experiencing under Kamala Harris and soon again under Tim Walz if he joins her as president, vice president. There's nothing about January 6th I think it's on anybody's minds. The media keeps bringing this up. The Democrats want to bring it up, but it's not anywhere forefront anywhere in any voter. They are dealing with some serious kitchen table issues right now, grocery bills, gas prices, 30% inflation that has just wiped out most of their savings, and people are living on their credit cards now. That's what they're going in the ballot box to talk about, and that's what they're going to send their vote on election day.
Okay, two-parter for you, Jordan, before I let you go here. Choose to answer this however you like, in whatever order you like. I'd like to hear from you if there was a particular thing that you thought Senator Vance could have done better to connect with Ohio voters, and then also what you thought his strongest performance aspect was from the debate last night.
I thought his strongest performance last night was showing, 90% of communication is in the body language. And with two men on stage, you really saw the dynamic between somebody who's in command and control of the issues and wants to help, had a compassionate heart, comes from a place of compassion. Growing up in Appalachia, obviously J.D. Vance is famous for, writing the Hillbilly Elegy and narrating that story of how hard it is to grow up in the Midwest when you're poor. He understands it. He articulated it. Tim Walz was making defensive statements. He was a deer in the headlights, and he could not answer those hard questions about why the economy is hurting so bad under Kamala Harris.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add to address the question of if there's any way he could have connected better with Ohio voters?
Oh, I thought it was a very, very strong performance. It was emblematic. You could see it straight, plain as day. Ronald Reagan said, "Don't be afraid to see what you see. It's time for America to get strong again. Vote Donald Trump, J.D. Vance."
All right, Jordan, we appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us again here on Ohio Has Issues.
Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Jordan for his time. We appreciate it.
Now we're going to talk to Democrats, of course. So we spoke with Cuyahoga County Democratic Party Chair David Brock. He was elected in 2022. He's a nonprofit worker from Cleveland's West Park neighborhood. Ran on a platform of strengthening the party's voter contact and turnout operation. Here's David.
David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.
So tell me, what did you think of the debate last night, and how do you think that the Democrats did?
I thought fantastic. Governor Walz was great. His personality shines through. His earnestness shines through. I thought he was great particularly on healthcare, on January 6th, how Trump was defeated in 2020 and their unwillingness to accept that. So I thought he was great. Yeah.
Just following some of the post-debate analysis from all the wonks, it does seem like people were surprised by how well J.D. Vance performed, and we're not expecting that out of him. It seems that way, at least. Yeah. Was that the impression that you're getting as well?
Yeah, well, I think he kept his Patrick Bateman vibes in check a little bit. So that was a good for his sake. I mean, he's a Yale law educated individual, so questioning his intellect is there. It's just that it has been bastardized by the modern Republican Party. I mean, remember, this is a guy who 8 years ago was clearly no fan of Trump or MAGAism. So if he allows that to breathe, he can be a common sense individual. But the problem is, too often he doesn't do that, and most of the time anymore, he simply doesn't do that. So
I want to go through what you think the goal of each candidate was going into the evening and whether or not they achieved that. First of all, do you think that your candidate, Tim Walz, achieved, what do you think his goal was, and do you think it was achieved?
Yeah, well, I think that the one thing about this debate was it was pretty heavy on specifics, which we didn't see in the first presidential debate. And I think he was able to outline not just what the Biden-Harris administration has done, but what they can do, and the laser focus on the middle class, which I think he drove home repeatedly, his references to what's taking place in his own home state. in terms of not just the environment, the effect on farmers, but also what he's been able to do with free school lunches, where he's been able to, sort of tax the wealthy, make them pay their fair share a little bit more. That's something that we want to translate nationally. So also, he just had to come out looking like a capable person, which he certainly did, and to defend the current vice president. So, and I thought he did a good job of that.
Now, JD Vance had probably a different goal. What do you think that goal was, and do you think it was achieved?
Well, I think he actually had two goals. One was to make his master happy, right? He couldn't openly criticize Trump, and anything that deviated from that and from what Trump wanted would have got JD Vance in a lot of trouble. By and large, he kept Trump happy, but he also had to show that that they can resonate with the middle class. And I think he attempted to do that, but then every time he would be somewhat successful, he'd be backtracked on what that campaign has done and said, and they couldn't answer simple questions about the deficit that Trump already created, and that Trump's economic plan would, I think, by a sevenfold cause a larger deficit to the United States than the Harris plan. So some of it he achieved, yeah, but I think Governor Walz achieved it as well. Yeah.
One of the big hindrances that Vance seems to have had in polling is that he's just not very likable, frankly.
Yeah.
His favorability rating is extremely low amongst almost any poll you see. And it does seem like his goal going into this was sort of to go out and say, hey, I'm a human being like you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that he successfully humanized himself to America? And do you think that's a threat to the Democrats?
I think it's hard because did you see how many people watched last night? I honestly don't know the number yet. Yeah. The vice presidential debate, we always get geeked up for this, but we can probably historically only remember one incident ever in a vice presidential debate. And that was Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, right? You're no JFK. Mm-hmm. So I think the next few days, JD Vance will say something awful again. Donald Trump said something awful yesterday, right? That right, military injuries are just like a headache, and Vance will have to parrot those things. So even if he succeeded yesterday, and I'm not sure he altogether did, but like I said, he kept his worst impulses in check largely. But I'm not sure it's going to matter in the long run.
There was a real shift, let's call it a shift in tone between the presidential debate and the vice presidential debate that was extremely stark. And then if you think about it, a lot of people at this level are just not used to seeing a debate where two people aren't screaming at each other because of where our politics has been at for so long. First of all, how did that make you feel seeing two debaters engaging relatively with some decency?
No, I mean, obviously you're happy to see that, right? And that's and people frequently are talking about civility in our politics, and I agree. I would like it to be that way, but they act like it's a two-way street. It's not. I mean, Republicans have done this. We're talking about a guy who first ran for president in 2015, and one of the first things he did was make fun of a disabled person. I mean, this is not both-sidism. This is the Republicans behaving this way and forcing at times Democrats to respond, but our inherent civility. We try to bring that out at all times, and you're right. And it was also, as I said, long on policy yesterday, which was good to see. So yeah, no, I appreciate it that those guys behaved like that.
I sense some frustration there, and I understand it. Do you feel like there is they're judged unfairly as candidates because we've come to expect less civility from one side than the other? And so then when we come out of this and people say, see, those guys could do it, but really, for the most part, Democrats are usually quite cordial in these situations. And really what they're saying is a Republican cannot come out screaming.
Right, exactly. There is a double standard. And this has been media favoritism towards Trump, not saying you or whatever, but I mean, by and large, they didn't know how to handle him in 2016. They still don't. So they repeat the things he says, and then they go and say, look, there's no civility. And it's like, well, we're not the ones saying this. We're not the ones saying that women of color have to go back to their country like he did to 4 members of Congress, 3 of whom were born in America. So it is frustrating, no question about that.
As you said, I don't know historically the vice presidential debate doesn't have a big effect on people or their perceptions of the candidates or whatnot. But we are in pretty unprecedented times, and this is a pretty unprecedented candidate in Donald Trump. So do you think it has more meaning for Americans and Ohioans to see that the person who would be behind him in line is at least capable of not having a seizure of rage during a debate performance?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's why he picked Pence too 4 years ago. And as I recall, the Pence-Harris debate was largely cordial as well. So I'm sure it probably helps people, but I think by and large minds are made up. And again, by this weekend, Vance and Trump will do something that'll make any gains, which I think were minimal, if at all, but go by the wayside. You know what I mean?
I can already see this media cycles and this debate slipping into the ether, but we will recall within a week or two a couple of moments from this debate. That's usually how it works. We'll be like, oh yeah, that was the debate where that happened, or they said that. What do you think the couple of moments were from either candidate that we might remember from this vice presidential debate?
Well, January 6th, and him and Vance not being able to say Trump lost in 2020, which is, just utterly sad and remarkable and a historic low in America. I mean, I think that will be, and I suspect, I mean, I'm not on the inside of the Harris-Walz campaign, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's used as some sort of ad or targeting, because they're just disconnected from reality. And when you're disconnected from reality, how can you help the millions and tens of millions who actually need help in this country? So that one I think stuck out a little bit primarily. And then obviously the Mike, asking, well, I thought you weren't going to fact check. I mean, we're at a point where, Republicans are upset when the media, whose job is it to checks facts.
Yep.
Yeah.
It does seem like those will be a couple of moments. That seems to be what people are talking about. He probably wishes he could have that line back at least of saying, I was told there would be no fact checking. I'm not totally quoting there, but that's essentially it.
Right.
And that's probably one of the things, you're right, that's going to come out of the whole fiasco. But you also had, you have to say, we had some bad moments on your candidate's side as well, including when he tried to describe pretty awkwardly a pretty shoddy accusation of stolen valor of sorts, and he didn't articulate it all that well. He seemed nervous in that exchange. Do you think that will have any effect at all?
No, I think nervousness and awkwardness is different than spurious lies and denying truths. So no, I'll be interested to see how the military and veteran vote goes this time. As you know, Joe Biden darn near won those groups, for the first Democrat to do that in, I don't even know, decades, if ever. And so no, I think again, awkwardness is one thing, creepiness and lies are different.
I believe the term is weird. They've been using.
Yes, I like the word creepy. I don't know why. I just
right.
Can't.
Well, we'll get it into the rotation.
Yeah,
all right, thank you very much for your time and for your analysis. And I hope to talk to you soon before the election.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for everything. Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you for the time, Mr. Brock.
Now, one thing I want to mention from your conversation with him, at the end there, David Brock mentioned that there should be a political ad made of the January 6th comments, or really the lack of comments from Senator Vance, where he would not answer whether former President Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, which we all know that he did. Well, literally today, Tim Walz posted on social media an ad, and it was using audio of Vance's comments, or again, lack thereof, and then showing images from the insurrection. And that is how fast it happens. Yeah. Literally that fast. Like within 12 hours.
And again, certain things crystallize, as we said that they do. And it does seem like that one's might stick around for a little bit. You might recall that we talked about ratings. We didn't know how many people watched this bad boy, but we do have an early look at the numbers from the vice presidential debate. It drew a total audience of 38.9 million on 8 major networks, and that's according to preliminary results released by Fox. Hosted by Paramount Global CBS News, which led the coverage with 9.1 million viewers on that platform. It was carried by other networks, including Fox News, which led cable channels with 7.7 million. Man, so they had 7.7, and CBS, the broadcast station, had 9.1.
Yeah.
And those are just preliminary numbers, of course.
Yeah.
Now,
and that's probably not including streaming numbers.
Right.
I think that was just the television broadcast. So it did reach a significant amount of people.
But You know what everybody's asking, Stephanie. It was a debate. That's where people compete against each other with their thoughts and words. So who won?
We are obsessed with winning.
Yeah, we are.
In this culture.
That's our culture. That's what made us great.
Well, the Washington Post did some analysis about it, debatable on whether our winning obsession is making us great. But the Washington Post did do some analysis about this.
Okay, what did they say? What came up from this? Let me see. So Washington Post once again asked uncommitted swing state voters in real time about their reactions to Tuesday's debate. They said, did this, and they did this for the presidential debate too, as you'll recall. The majority thought that Vance performed better, regardless of how they planned to vote in November. And the big takeaway from this was that the vice presidential debate mostly reinforced how voters were leaning before the debate. In other words, like a lot of people didn't come in there and this changed any minds or anything. Although I think it would be really hard to argue to have watched that debate and not say that Vance won on points in that debate. I mean, he was a great debater, and that's his strong suit. So I wasn't particularly surprised by that. He actually, Tim Walz, when he got selected by Kamala Harris, he apologized in advance to her he said that he's a lousy debater. And either that was, you know how they try and set the bar low for themselves for when the debates come up, and that way if they do stink, then they're just like, hey, I told you, so you can't really be surprised. If that was his move, he did that super early. He did it like as soon as he's like, just so you know, I'm not great at that. I can barbecue like a madman. I can fix your carburetor, but I'm not terrific at debating. And I think that both of them, not that you asked me, but I think they both accomplish a little something. His was to pretty much not mess anything up. One of his weaknesses was his debating, and he acknowledged that, so he had to go into it and not screw up too much, and I think he represented himself well, even though he technically lost the debate. J.D. Vance was there to try and humanize himself, I feel like, a little bit. He has really historic numbers as far as unfavorability. He is not a well-liked man. So you can tell that he went in there trying to calm everybody down and say, hey, I'm not a weirdo, everybody be cool, and also to speak about the platform that he and Trump have and try and make sense of some of it. And I think he did well. I do. So I actually think that they both accomplished what they set out for last night.
Well, that's in line with what these swing state voters said to the Washington Post and what we're seeing by experts, all over the political spectrum, that Vance did win that debate. A lot of people are saying, there was a whole conversation about whether Walz was just trying to kind of do no harm, and people felt that was in line with what they saw from Walz there. But I do want to show you this chart from the Washington Post and their analysis of these swing state voters. So there were 12 voters who leaned toward former President Donald Trump and Vance before the debate. And after the debate, 5 said they would definitely vote for Trump, and 7 said they would still probably vote for Trump. Now, there were 9 voters who leaned more toward Vice President Kamala Harris and Walz before the debate. 6 said they would definitely support Harris after the debate. 2 said they would probably vote for Harris, and 1 switched to probably backing Trump. And there were 2 voters who were undecided before the debate. 1 said they would probably vote for Harris, and 1 said they would vote for a third-party candidate. So again, the takeaway here is, at least from the Washington Post analysis, that this didn't have a huge impact on that group, a small group of swing state voters who had checked it out.
It does kind of feel like something that will fall into the ether and is almost already evaporating from our brains.
Well, it's a good thing we got this show out now then.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate you.
We have 4 more regular shows, and those are dropping Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., and then our election night special, which starts on Tuesday, November 5th at 6:30 p.m., where we will all find out the results. Probably, actually, maybe not on election night.
That'd have to be a long show.
There'll be some time, but we'll get
here
closer
until we get tired. Thanks for watching, everybody. This is Ohio Has Issues.
See you next week.